that the operation was performed. I stared at his face as he entered the recovery room. He embodied the ideal of a decent action hero. She heroically rescued a drowning toddler on camera, earning her the title of Sound of Music star. Urick and Heather Menses were. Nobody discusses the ending of Hollywood's most underappreciated love tale. The cancer that tore their lives apart, the tragic events that followed one after the other, and the death that occurred precisely 15 years later. Concurrently to the very minute. These were more than random occurrences. Almost unbelievably brutal is what truly transpired between Robert and Heather. According to reports, Robert Urich had 15 separate TV programs, more than any other starring male in history. Simply said, that would establish his legendary status. However, his narrative extended beyond quantity. The story revolved around his ability to consistently shock audiences as he transitioned from action star to dramatic lead, Broadway singer, and finally, a renowned documentary host. The majority of performers find themselves confined. Robert defied all expectations. He began while competing on the Ohio football team. Just natural ability, charisma, and a close buddy named Burt Reynolds. No posh ties whatsoever. Burt had faith in him from the start, and even helped him get his first major break. In 1975, that photo was released with SW8. In the role of Officer Robert Jim Street, an unlikable but tough police officer. It was a short show. Because it was deemed excessively violent, it was discontinued in 1976. However, it made him recognizable to a massive audience. All of a sudden, he was more than simply a promising young man. He was destined to become famous. Vega was the next. In the 1978 to 1981 series, Robert portrayed the role of Dantana, a hip private investigator for the Sin City. It was more than that. A watershed milestone in cultural history occurred at that period. He solved crimes while zipping over neon-lit neighborhoods in a red 1957 Ford Thunderbird. Suit and scowl. By the way, that vehicle took the place of a yellow Corvette that caught fire in the pilot. Robert and the red TRD both become legendary. For his performance, he was nominated for 2 Golden Globes. Plus, he became a symbol, as well as suave, intelligent, and smooth-talking. He represented primetime drama for a period of time. Urich, however, was not done yet. He was unrivaled in his dominance over television for the following 30 years. 15 leading roles across all platforms. He did comedic work in a soap opera as a tennis pro who utterly bungled his game. The subject of espionage was addressed in Gavilan. In the mid-90s, he even featured in a western called The Lazarus Man. He was practically inconsolable from 1973 to 2001. He also wasn't coasting along. He was never afraid to attempt something new, shift gears, or take a chance. Being a one-note star wasn't enough for him. I wanted him to do everything. Then the hired man Spencer showed up. It wasn't like any other mystery program. From 1985 through 1988, it generated almost $50 million for Massachusetts. That's how much it cost to film in Boston, the city that provided the show's gritty, real vibe. Robert managed to make it through the harsh winters and short resources. Yes, that was successful. He had incredible chemistry with co-star Avery Brooks, who portrayed the enigmatic and resolute Hawk. Car chases and gunfights weren't the show's focus. The show's devoted audience adored its themes of morality, justice, and character development, even in the face of pain. Afterwards, he made a triumphant return as Spencer in 4 television movies, demonstrating the characters and Robert's enduring popularity. However, he pulled a fast one right when everyone believed they understood him. The National Geographic Explorer brand adopted him. He presided over the show from 1988 to 1995, during which time it moved about between TBS, CNBC, and MSNBC. Submarine mysticism and long-lost cultures were brought to light by his voice, which became known as the Sound of Wonder. He truly meant it, not only acting out a script. That's why his narration of Ubit's Terror on Our Shores in 1992 earned him an Emmy and a Cable Ace Award in 1993. He was also the host of Assignment Completed, and Cable AC earned a second time for it. I wasn't doing these gigs for fun. Robert demonstrated his range in these esteemed, serious performances. He would have achieved legendary status even if he had ended his story there. However, an additional act remained. The year 2000 was a tough one for Synoville Cell. Robert's Broadway debut was in 1996, while he was still battling seroma, an aggressive and uncommon form of cancer. Between January 5th and February 13th, he appeared in Chicago as Billy Flynn. Even though he had performed the part in smaller venues like Detroit and Washington, D.C. on tour, this was his big break. At the Schubert Theater, he was spot on. His performance and the fact that he could sing, really sing, shocked the audience. Plus, another item emerged. His wife remarked afterwards that he left with a sparkle in his eye. While performing, he shone brightly despite being exhausted after chemotherapy. Heather Menses was born to Scottish parents in Toronto on December 3, 1949. They had fled the destruction of post-war Britain. As a struggling artist, her father was always looking for a new beginning. Canada, however, presented them with difficulties. Destitute, hopeless, and broke, they clung to each other. Something that Hollywood couldn't teach Heather was this tough immigrant life. Grit. At the age of 14, Vancouver, Miami, London, and Southern California were the 4 cities Heather had previously called home, spread out across 2 nations. When her father's artistic career took a nosedive, the family uprooted and relocated once more. Heather swiftly had to adapt to different educational systems, learn new accents, and make friends. It wore me out, but that, being unstable, allowed her to adapt. Something that would be useful to her later on was her habit of constantly reinventing herself. Then, Heather's life took a turn when, at the tender age of 14, she strolled into a casting call naively lacking any prior acting experience. Dozens of young women considered performing in a musical called The Sound of Music. The majority of them had training, agents, and resumes. On her record, Heather only had one long-forgotten TV show. Something else, though, was with her. She existed. Her inherent charisma was striking. In an instant, she was cast in the role of Louisa Von Trapp. Glamorous singing in the Swiss Alps wasn't the only part of the filming. There was a terrible moment that almost made the film a tragedy. In the rowboat scenario, the vessel went overboard. Little Gretel, played by Kim Carth, a 5-year-old co-star of Heather's, was unable to swim. Twice, she had an epiphany. Everything was being recorded. Julie Andrews took a tumble. Helena remained unfazed as the rest of the crew froze. She proceeded to swim directly to Kim, rescued her by pulling her up. After becoming ill from swallowing so much water, Kim thereafter feared swimming for the rest of her life. Everything you see on screen is based on reality, however the moment was cut from the film. Heather came to her rescue. Member of the cast. On March 2, 1965, the film The Sound of Music debuted in theaters, and it was an instant smash. By 1966, it had become the highest-grossing film of all time and had received 5 Academy Awards. The film grossed $286 million globally from 283 million ticket sales. It was the most successful film in 29 nations. Heather Menses, who had been the shy, immigrant girl, became renowned overnight. That young lady was just 15 years old. Heather, on the other hand, had no desire to spend eternity like innocent Louisa. Consequently, she made a bold move in 1973. In a spread called Tender Trap, she posed naked for Playboy. Although the moniker was a playful homage to her background in The Sound of Music, the message was loud and clear. No longer was she a child. Everyone was taken aback. In just 8 years. Once upon a time, in a family film, she played the role of the naive adolescent. She was now confident in her image, and was willing to risk alienating her devoted followers, who continued to identify her as Louisa. In the same year, she had a starring role in a surreal horror flick. Christina was the role she performed. Descendant of a deranged scientist who transformed humans into serpents. There were actual snakes in it, and it was strange and cheap. Heather, though, showed no fear. Her detractors praised her attractiveness and grace. Even in this outlandish part, she was attempting to, rather than fading away. She played Jessica Six in the 1977 science fiction series Logan's Run, in which the average lifespan of a human being was 30 years long, and they were all hunted down. Despite the show's brief run of 14 episodes, Heather stood out due to her provocative outfit and defiant personality. Some CBS executives were worried that she appeared too sexually suggestive for a children's program. It was necessary to alter her attire so that she could wear pink briefs and tights. However, Heather did not budge. This was her new identity. She produced in 1978 P.N., a legendary horror smash produced by movie maestro Roger Corman, was her most successful career move to date. With a budget of slightly over $700,000, the picture managed to earn $16 million. A lawsuit filed by Universal was subtly abandoned, and even Steven Spielberg gushed about it. As Maggie McCann, Heather portrayed a courageous skip-tracing pilot who steered the ship. Piranha became a classic in large part due to her performance, which she delivered while coexisting with a cast of horror movie regulars. In a staged hash commercial, Robert Urich and Heather Menses met while playing the role of a married couple. Thinks it's ridiculous? However, everything changed that day in 1974 on set. For the rest of their lives. At the age of 25, Heather Menses was attempting to put the past of a failed marriage behind her. At 28, Robert Urich was in peak Hollywood form, fit, charismatic, and about to make it big. A married couple was being filmed for an Ordinary Libby's commercial. Married couple. And suddenly, it all made sense. This wasn't mere performance. A genuine bond was established. That the sensation persisted long after the cameras had stopped rolling. The day when acting as if one were in love evolved into something far more serious. More profound. The work was more than that. A love tale that would endure for 27 years began with that. Even as an actor, Robert wasn't having trouble making it. He was on the cusp of becoming famous. After only 1 year, he became famous all over the United States in 1975 when SW8 aired on television. Fans adored him for his portrayal of the heroic yet gruff cop, Officer Jim Street. However, it was planned. With a lot of hard effort, Robert had transformed his look, going from 180 to a size 180. At least 200 pounds of pure muscle simply to be an action hero. He was well-connected, charismatic, and handsome. He even got his big break thanks to one of them, Burt Reynolds. Reynolds persuaded Aaron Spelling, the producer, to give Robert a chance. Spelling was sold after just one audition. Robert Urich was suddenly on his way. At the same time, Heather was experiencing a watershed moment in her life. Once upon a time, she had achieved immense fame. She portrayed the role of Louisa Von Trapp in the legendary musical The Sound of Music when she was just 15 years old. However, the days of becoming a child star are over. Her journey from kid star to serious actress was already underway when she crossed paths with Robert. There was her 4-year marriage, which started when she was 20 years old, and she was also getting over that. Alongside Robert. Additionally, he had tied the knot with Barbara Rucker, his college love, on one occasion. He was wary after that marriage, which ended peacefully. For that reason, his marriage to Heather, which took place little over a year after they met, was shocking, if not too risky. They exchanged wedding vows on November 21, 1975. Fast? Without a doubt. However, the consensus among those who knew them was unanimous. It was correct. Shortly after meeting Heather, Robert informed his pals that he knew she was the one. It was not Hollywood jargon either. It held true. It wasn't a fling, yet their romance burned brightly. Particularly in the entertainment industry, this kind of bond doesn't materialize very often. They formed an unusual Hollywood power couple when they were together, lacking any. No need for excitement. Heather left an indelible mark on film. Soon Robert would be a TV king. He was nominated for 2 Golden Globes for his performance in the 3-year-running, sophisticated crime drama Vega, which he had landed by 1978. That's when they started to get widespread recognition, not merely independently yet in tandem. Photojournalists adored them. It wasn't merely their attractiveness as a couple that led to their appearance on magazine covers. The expressions on their faces were telling the story. It wasn't a brand they were peddling. All they could feel was love. Robert certainly made no secret of the fact. Inviting Heather into his life was something he did tirelessly from the start. On Vago, she had an appearance in 3 episodes. He landed her a role in Spencer for Hire later on. However, it was more than that. Discussing his life was the main point. Their triumph was his triumph. Robert wholeheartedly supported Heather's decision to prioritize her family over her professional career. In a field where egos often triumph, that type of backing was virtually unprecedented. Heather learned she was expecting a child in 1975, just after she and her husband tied the knot. The news brought immense joy to her and Robert, even though they weren't really trying. "We were absolutely thrilled," Heather reflected afterwards. Their enthusiasm, however, was short-lived. The baby was lost to her. The pain of losing someone wasn't done yet. Over and over, Heather experienced miscarriages. They suffered through 3 pregnancies and 3 miscarriages in quick succession. What started as optimism soon became a pattern of sadness, and friends started to worry that the pair wouldn't make it through the emotional roller coaster. On top of that, they were both experiencing meteoric rises in their respective industries. Under the bright lights of Hollywood, their lives were crumbling apart behind the scenes. Robert and Heather had to make a tough decision, adoption, after their 3rd loss. It wasn't a quick one. Their first kid, Ryan, was born in 1978 after a lengthy and arduous procedure that began with a waiting list. Emily followed in 1980, and Allison was born 20 years later in 1998. This was not an accident. They wanted to ensure that each child had the full support of the family. Honor due to them. Ryan specialized in infectious diseases and became a doctor. He once stated, "I went into medicine because I couldn't help my dad medically, but maybe I can help someone else." Emily is a registered nurse who now works in an emergency room in Ontario. The children discovered a way to heal, perhaps as a result of witnessing their father's heroic struggle for survival. Heather, who had been on the rise, made her own sacrifice. She had played Louisa in The Sound of Music and Jessica 6 in Logan's Run. Became busy, famous, and booked. However, after they adopted, she stepped back. Hollywood didn't anticipate women doing that, but she did. Following 1979, her acting career took a nosedive. She appeared in a handful of Vega episodes, a guest stint on T.J. Hooker, and the film Endangered. Something, and then nothing at all. She gave it up so her kids might have a stable home. Robert was also unconventional. He wasn't the type of dad who left the set to raise his kids with nannies, despite being one of them. An actor who was one of the busiest on television, appearing in 15 series over the course of 30 years, he always made sure to be present on Spencer or Higher. His contract allowed him to travel cross-country whenever Emily had medical appointments, which was unusual, if not unprecedented, in the 1980s. Robert knelt down on the floor with Ryan, eye to eye, and questioned what was going on rather than yelling when Ryan misbehaved. His goal was to understand, not punish. It wasn't just about showing up, it was about connecting. Just 2 days before he passed away, Robert still knelt down on one knee to play with his youngest daughter, Allison. However, all changed in August 1996 when Robert underwent a routine checkup at the hospital. Diagnostic test. However, something was discovered. Robert, who was 49 years old, was diagnosed with synovial sarcoma, an aggressive and uncommon disease that targets the soft tissues around the joints. This type of cancer is most common in individuals under the age of 30. The cancer had spread to his groin, and the impending rigorous treatment, chemo, radiation, and numerous surgeries, couldn't have come at a worse time. He had recently debuted a new series, The Lazarus Man, and was physically and mentally in peak condition. A second season was in the works when the diagnosis hit Hollywood hard. However, Castle Rock Entertainment abruptly canceled the show just weeks after the news broke, shocking everyone. Only 20 episodes out of 22 had aired. 2 completed episodes remained on the shelf. TNT had already decided to renew the show, making the termination all the more unexpected. He began a 6-month grueling regimen of chemotherapy and radiation in July 1996. Made it to the hospital every morning at 5:45 a.m., where he was injected with potassium, bicarbonate, and anti-nausea medications before the real punishment started, chemotherapy, which lasted for 9 days in 4-hour sessions. Day 6, Robert described the radiation as if it were pool chemicals being shot through his veins. He attempted to divert his attention, but the nausea and anguish persisted, and the radiation was even more severe. They directed tens of millions of rads, thousands of. The radiation was 10 times stronger than a standard X-ray beam, targeted at the cancer in his groin while sparing the surrounding tissue. By February 1997, he was balding, gasping for oxygen, and the illness had taken hold. He wasn't merely battling cancer, he was waging an uphill battle. Cancer. He was battling to stay alive, while the cure was being administered. Then, in October 1997, surgeons attempted to remove the remaining tumor, but upon opening him up, they found nothing. "I began to wonder if I ever had it," Robert remarked in shock after discovering no tumor, cancer, or dead tissue. It was as if the sickness had never been there. He was given a 5% risk of relapse by the doctors. Robert became the national ambassador for the American Cancer Society in 1998 after being certified cancer-free. He addressed the world, "It's part of my deal I made with God to spread the word that it is," marking the first time in years that there was actual hope possible to survive. After a hiatus from the workforce, Robert returned to the stage in Love Oat and The Next Wave. After 2 years, he finally achieved a lifelong goal by playing Billy Flynn in Chicago on Broadway. Robert and As he and Heather began to plan their future, he gave all $125,000 of his earnings from Who Wants to Be a Millionaire to cancer research. Doctors claimed a 95% cure rate, and they felt they had conquered the odds. For the first time, it appeared like the story would end on a positive note when Heather established the Euro Fund to promote seroma studies at the University of Michigan. He also began penning his memoir, An Extraordinary Life, and traveled the nation encouraging people to get screened early. However, this was not the case. In November 2001, the cancer decided to make a comeback, and new lumps started to emerge. Initially, doctors believed a new medication might manage this, but they were mistaken. This time, there was no longer any hope for Robert. The sickness had progressed from its localized origin to a systemic one, and the disease was far more aggressive, powerful, and swift than before. Robert had recently completed production on his last show, The Emerald, an NBC comedy. His acting career came to a close just as the cancer launched its last assault. He and Heather had thought they were finally free. They had rebuilt their lives, but now it was all coming crashing down. Only this time, they weren't. Robert Urich passed away at 7:22 p.m. on April 16, 2002, at Los Robles Regional Medical Center in California. Heather, his wife, and their 3 adopted children, Ryan, 24, Emily, 22, were all aware of the inevitable conclusion to the story. He had been admitted to the hospital only days before for respiratory difficulties, and Allison, who was only 4 years old at the time, was by his side the entire time. Even in his last weeks, he continued to write on his memoirs, searching for anything meaningful to leave behind. On the night before he passed away, his final Night of the Wolf had just been on national television. Heather was 52 years old when she became a widow. They had been married for 27 years. Heather had been at his side through all of his surgeries, chemotherapy treatments, and moments of fear. They had a family through adoption, but she had to face the world alone after losing children to miscarriage. Her grief was immense, but she was strong. 3 days later, about 1,000 people gathered to St. Tony Danza, Gavin Loud, and Tom Selleck were among the celebrities who paid respect at the funeral held at North Hollywood's Charles Borromeo Church. "It's sad because of who Bob is and was," Selleck told reporters. "The kind of things that come from genuine friendship." From the crowd, outside, surrounded by flowers, stood a black and white photo of Robert. The man who had formerly held the record for most television series appearances was no longer with us, but his legacy would live on. Heather continued her relentless pursuit of Robert, as they had done even before his death, established a joint fund, but now she expanded it into the Robert Urich Foundation, a more active strategy that she sought to achieve through hosting more events, raising more awareness, and increasing funding for research. She compared leading the organization to every priceless day I spent with Robert, explaining that it is a source of motivation for her. The children were brought up by her. She continued to labor. Her suffering became her driving force. Heather Menses Urich, who had a starring role as Louisa Von Trapp in The Sound of Music, was diagnosed with glioblastoma multiforme, a very aggressive and fatal brain cancer, at the age of 68, and the most important thing is that this occurred precisely 15 years ago. Following the tragic loss of her husband, actor Robert Urich, to cancer in 2002, Heather devoted the past 15 years to the fight against the disease. Through the Robert Urich Foundation, she raised funds, assisted patients, and did all in her power to ensure that no other family had to endure what she had. Robert had fought cancer for 6 years. His story gave them hope and courage, but now it was her turn. The illness she had been battling had finally caught up with her. The diagnosis came 4 weeks before she passed away, leaving them little time to prepare or say goodbye. Glioblastoma doesn't waste any time. It spreads and progresses at a breakneck pace. Heather's son, Ryan Urich, informed the press that his mother's health deteriorated rapidly following the diagnosis. Those who knew Heather, who was more than just an actress, a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, found this news particularly painful because it meant there was no time to arrange for treatment, no last-minute scientific trials, and no opportunity to provide the type of assistance she had dedicated her life to helping others. Ballet dancer, mother, and life-immersive woman. But in a flash, her vivacious spirit dwindled, and she went away. Her Hollywood friends, some of whom had known her for decades, hardly had an opportunity to bid her farewell. Death came on Christmas Eve, December 24, 2017, at precisely 7:22 p.m. at the family home in Frankfort, Ontario, with her 3 children by her side. Ryan later stated that she was not in pain. After over 4 weeks of fighting the unavoidable, she had finally had enough. The scene was serene and symbolic. Christmas Eve is a season for loved ones, for embracing one another, for clinging to the promise of a better future. However, for them, it became the instant they lost her for all time, a lingering reminder of Robert's death. He had died on April 16, 2002, and Heather had passed away exactly 15 years and 8 months later. The timing of their deaths was striking, and more suffering was to come. A little over a year later, Charmian Carr, who played Liesl in The Sound of Music, passed away earlier in September 2016. The loss of another Von Trapp sister has devastated fans of the film. The young girl who had sung her last song had finally taken her last bow. Ryan didn't only announce his mother's demise, he detailed everything had transpired, down to the hour. Ryan claimed his mother was pain-free, yet, after a life filled with relentless enthusiasm, she was aware. Ryan also made sure that people recognized her for who she really was, not simply as Louisa Von Trapp. When the time came to let go, she chose to do so, and she breathed her last with dignity, not fear or struggle. Throughout her life, she had been graceful, a dancer, an actress, a fighter, and someone who opted to spend her years assisting others.